least.
Just for item 14, please.
Oh, just for item 14. Yeah, thank you. All right, so now we'll move on to, where are we? Item 24, Council Priorities for Capital Acceleration Fund. Moved by Raf, seconded by Dion. So we'll start off with questions. Or is there a... Did you want to make a presentation? No. All right. So I think, should we just open it up for debate? It's probably the best thing. Eh? You have a question?
Yeah, one question. Based on the first submissions, Aaron, his question whether council is obliged, have to go to the public consultation regarding to the fund additional $300 million.
So I'd refer you, Councillor Chen, to section 2 of the report. So the significance assessment in the report, and also conscious of the decision that is being sought from you today. So it is emphasised in the report, but for an absolute sake of clarity, the decision being sought from you today is on the proposals that you will put forward at stage 1. So the indicative proposals for allocation for the $300 million capital acceleration facility.
Yes.
You're not making the final decision today,
yes.
And if those proposals go forward and those proposals are accepted yes. By joint ministers, then we'll work up the detailed business cases, and the detailed business cases will equally come back to Council for approval before being submitted again to Cabinet for stage 2.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Tim?
Just point 5, can the multi-use stadium, shouldn't it be multi-use arena?
We've changed the names a couple of times on whether it's an arena or a stadium. My understanding is that the current terminology that we're using is a multi-use stadium, but I'm happy to be corrected. The intent is, as was articulated in the presentations this morning, that it's a multi-purpose, multi-use, not simply a rugby field with seats around it.
Can we just change 5 to arena/stadium? Because I think it is an important point, because and that point was made today. It's not just a stadium. Have you got questions? One question here, one question there, one question. Andrew, Glenn and Yanni.
Thank you. Brendan, just seeking some clarity around the issue that was raised about the claim of a guarantee by government at the time of 50-50 contribution in the cost-sharing agreement, relating, I guess, to clause B in the schedule relating to the stadium. Are you able to just give some guidance around that? Because I'm aware that there was an issue raised in one of the deputations this morning, that obviously your guidance on this or your interpretation may well provide some guidance as we work through that issue.
Sure. So the cost share agreement that was agreed and signed by the Council at the time in 2013 and the government at the time provided a number of options in terms of a stadium. The interpretation of the clauses in the cost share agreement, so it's pretty clear that the council contribution is at a maximum $253 million, that's stated, and then there's some optionality depending then on whether the Council and Crown went with I think it's 35,000 seat in the cost share agreement, covered stadium in the CBD, and there's a $216 million gap that in the cost share agreement says to be determined, and the understanding of how that was to be determined was that could be a variety of contributions from the private sector, philanthropic funding, or any other mechanisms for funding. And the stadium was costed in 2013, 35,000 covered at $506 million, so the council 50% share is very clear. What's not clear, and the reason that we don't have a stadium or any progress on the stadium, is that that remaining funding gap has never been closed. So the reality is that the work that's been undertaken has never been able to close the funding gap. So the 300 million capital acceleration facility, the purpose of that was to provide certainty, and the option for you today is to close that funding gap and therefore provide the necessary certainty on the stadium.
So the funding, so the contribution that the cost share agreement guarantees, given that interpretation, is basically the minimum is the land only from government.
Yeah, that was the...
The cost share agreement does have the land, and the land is separate to the either the 220 million or the 253 million. If I understand where you're coming from, you could see this 300 million as a contribution from the Crown, or you could see this 300 million as a contribution to the council, and then the council contributes it to the stadium.
But basically they were saying if the private sector didn't come to the party, or to be determined, it just said whatever to be determined means.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was $216 million to be determined. If private sector funding couldn't be obtained, or the Crown didn't meet its half share, with the council's contribution being capped at 253 million, the Crown will amend, if necessary, the CCRP, so it's the Central City Recovery Plan that decides this, to allow the council to build a 35,000 seat rectangular uncovered stadium on the site proposed under the CCRP. The Crown will contribute the land to the project, with the CCC funding all other costs. So the cost sharing agreement is exactly as Andrew has highlighted. It says it's only if they can't find the private sector money, then it will put all of the costs on the council and just give us the land. Yep. Sorry, Glenn and then Yanni. Phil.
Thank you, Brendan. Just asking this question over and against the backdrop of one of our aspirations, which is 20,000 residents in the CBD. So, in terms of residential inner city living, I recall the pre-feasibility ruled out a configuration of a multi-use arena with hospitality, with hotels, etc. Do you know whether any thought's been given to permanent residential on the same site? Is something which could be structured up financially, actually, to help it pay, at least in terms of
the decision being sought today isn't at that level of detail, and I'd expect the business case to traverse the full range of
the business case will come up with all of the
I just wonder whether it came out in the pre-feasibility.
No, but the pre-feasibility is almost irrelevant at this stage. It's the allocation.
Okay.
Yeah. Yanni.
So I just wanted to check under 4.9, it says if council wishes to consider other projects for funding outside the scope of the stadium, residential red zone and horizontal infrastructure, then staff can provide further advice and return to council with revised recommendations at a later point in time. So can you just clarify what the process would be, for example, if we were wanting to approach this fund for social housing, what the process would be?
Sure. So on the social housing one, obviously you've allocated 50 million in the establishment of the housing trust, a $5 million cash gift and 45 million capitalisation, and then in the 2018 LTP you allocated $30 million that you're now consulting on how that's arranged. So if you wanted, instead of any of these projects, to allocate further than the $80 million to refurbishment or development of new social housing, that would be a matter for council, and if the council decides that it doesn't want to accept this advice, then staff could work on alternative advice, but that would be a matter for council.
So the process would be to put a resolution to the meeting today to seek that advice and withhold some of the money?
That would be a matter for council.
That would be an amendment to the resolution. Yeah.
Okay. And then, sorry.
Thank you. Thanks, Brennan. Just following that question, my understanding from the reports is that in fact the Capital Acceleration Fund in effect doesn't include housing, and that's a separate matter. Have I got that correct? That in fact we couldn't apply for housing funding through this Capital Acceleration Fund?
So all of the public discourse, both as Aaron Campbell recorded this morning from the Labour Party manifesto before it was in government, and then from ministers in government, and I've articulated it pretty clearly in the paper, has talked about that the purpose of this fund is to provide certainty and to accelerate projects, and the three projects that consistently and repeatedly mentioned are the stadium, the residential red zone, and horizontal infrastructure. No one's, I don't think, ever said that things are out of scope or can't be funded, but I do come back to we would need to meet the purposes of the fund to provide certainty and to accelerate projects. And
that follows discussions that senior staff have had with central government? Yeah,
so the central government perspective is that they're happy for us to make the proposals, but as I've said in the paper, there's equally a process that they would need to ensure for the drawdown of government funding, and they would want to make sure that there wasn't any unintended precedent set, that the purpose of this fund is for Christchurch, and it's to reflect the earthquakes and the consequences of the earthquakes, and so being able to draw clear links to what we're seeking funding for, and unfunded projects as a result of kind of earthquake legacy issues is going to be critically important. So I wouldn't want to create a rod for our own back by trying to be too tricky in terms of what we were seeking funding for. The three projects that were proposed are well lined up with the three criteria that have been frequently talked about.
Thank you.
Can you, just one question, can you confirm that none of the three proposals make any difference to our LTP allocation, because they're all additional funds coming in from central government to accelerate both the delivery of the stadium, multi-use arena, and transport infrastructure that wouldn't have been done otherwise, and residential red zone funding we didn't have on our budget.
That's correct. I'd describe these as it's a $300 million surge over and above the LTP. So as you will remember, your LTP has $5.7 billion worth of capital, I think, over the next 10 years, this is a $300 billion surge investment, and the decisions that are proposed here are consistent with the decisions that you made in the LTP, specifically on the stadium, where you agreed to bring forward the $253 million by 2 years, and you also acknowledged that the stadium multi-purpose arena would be one of the first draws from the Capital Acceleration Facility. You invested heavily in roading repairs in the LTP, including based on feedback from residents through that process. The $40 million proposed here would be a surge to address those worst affected areas over and above the investment that you're making in the LTP. And in your LTP, you have approximately $140 million for works in the area of the residential red zone, including the cycleway, land drainage works, and bridge. And this proposal would be in addition to that funding.
Thank you. Vicky.
Brendan, you've been involved in these discussions with others. Is this the fastest, most expedient way of getting this money out of the government?
There's a process. So yes, it is the most expedient way to get the money out of the government. These three proposals line up with the statements that the now Prime Minister made when she was leader of the Labour Party. They line up with the budget documents that have been released. They line up with the kind of criteria that have been talked about in that they're the stadium, horizontal infrastructure and the residential red zone. So when it comes to providing certainty and us being able to spend the money, then these three are the fastest ones.
Yeah. Thank you. Yanni?
Sorry, I just had several other questions. One was, why is this not being done as part of the cost share refresh? Particularly things like clarification around who's paying for things like the stadium or who's doing the stadium?
We're not doing a cost share refresh.
As you know, and I think it was talked about this morning in Aaron's deputation as well. This is part of a wider global settlement that we'll be talking with the Crown about in due course. But this is the first part. This was announced as part of Budget 2018. If you want to move quickly on this, then we've given you some options today.
Right, and just the assessment that we've assessed that it should be, it's of medium significance. And it states that there's been consultation through the LTP, although specific projects and quantum of funding hasn't been allocated from this fund. Why do we not consider this to be high significance in light of the submissions that we've heard from people and the fact that there was no public engagement on the original cost share, which has created this problem? So I'm just trying to understand how we get away from talking to our community about how this money should be allocated, because it's never been put in a clear...
It has no impact on the long-term plan. I mean, that's actually the truth of it. It has no impact.
But I would have thought it would be high significance.
It's a grant from government. So, yeah.
So I've assessed it as medium significance. The paper I trust and hope is clear. I've tried to be very clear on the decision being sought from Council today is for a proposal that will then go to Cabinet Ministers, to Joint Ministers. It is stage one of a two-stage process. The proposals in the paper are consistent with the feedback that you've received, notwithstanding that it wasn't explicitly included in the consultation document. But those are ultimately your choices. I'd also simply remind all councillors that the $253 million from the stadium, that is still the council's contribution, has been in every annual plan and long-term plan since 2013.
Yes, but what I'm trying to understand, given that there was no public consultation on the blueprint and there was no public consultation on the cost share, why we can rely on the community engagement without the key financial information as being okay, it just doesn't. I'm just trying to understand how we come to that conclusion. And there's been no specific consultation about these projects.
But this is a grant from central government, and we have had $253 million on our budget right from when we arrived here. And we've brought it forward, and we did so explicitly in the LTP, and that was a decision that was supported by, Well, let
me rephrase it another way then. And the final question is, if we chose that this is of high significance and that we would like public consultation on how this money is allocated, how long would that take, and what's the best way to do that?
I suspect if you wanted to consult with the public on the allocation of the $300 million, while we haven't planned for that, that would be a relatively time-consuming process, including the consideration in particular of how you would deal with the feedback. So the paper's clear that these aren't the only worthy projects in the city. There are a large range of worthy projects, but to meet the criteria for the funding and to provide the certainty and acceleration, that these are the first 3 projects. If the fund was far larger, then there would be many other things that we'd put in, but it would take a considerable length of time and it would delay being able to provide any certainty.
I'm relatively sure that, given the high level of interest in the matter, that people will, do a sort of kind of an independent and statistically valid survey of public opinion on this issue. But it is a government grant. It's a government grant, and it enables us to do the very thing that the government wanted, which was momentum. We can't get the stadium finished. We can't get it started without knowing that the money is there. But we're not going to take any eye off the amount of money. So if there are any savings to be made, we want them off the 253 million.
Yes. Sorry, Leanne, you also mentioned that in response to Councillor Johansson's question, obviously Regenerate Christchurch have released the outcomes of their public consultation just in the last week, and the percentage was either 89% in support or 91% in support of the Green Spine, but it was around 90% in support of the Green Spine, which was a statistically significant surveying method undertaken by proper surveying company. Likewise, you've received a huge amount of feedback every time that we consult on annual plans or long-term plans about fixing the roads, and this is what that's proposing.
And it will generate more money, this money, because for every dollar we put in, I mean, this fund puts in, we put in money, and NZTA puts in money.
That's right. So NZTA and Treasury have confirmed that if you can take this as a grant, that the council's contribution on the roads would be eligible, subject to inclusion in the standard processes for the NZTA contributions as well. We're still trying to identify exactly what the contributions are. They've changed under the most recent National Land Transport Plan, but we will be able to report back to you in due course once we're at the business case stage, and we also know what projects we propose to spend it on what the multiplier effect of that is.
Great. All right, well, we'll open it up for debate, and Tim.
Thank you. I'll go first. Look, first of all, I'd really like to thank the government for this stimulus, and also the Minister for Christchurch, Dr. Megan Woods. Without her pushing it through, or support through Cabinet, I don't think we'd be having this debate, which would be an absolute crime. So to Megan and the Labor or the present government, thank you very much. Just hopefully we will approve this today, and if we do, don't forget that the next stage of the process is focusing on developing a robust investment case. The investment case will also examine the economic and social benefits as well as the financial costs, and that will lead into a business case. So this is just a step in the process, and hopefully a good process and a quick process, because if we start land investigation in 2019, we can start the build in 2021, with hopefully completed in 2023, which will be a huge stimulus to the central city. We had mention of the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker in Sydenham and the back streets, Buchan Street, etc. There are family laundries which rely on heads and beds in the city. A lot of them are actually New Zealanders. They're not in suits, they're not driving fancy cars, and they're certainly not on boards, etc. So it really is, a lot of people will survive on this and add stimulus to this. We also heard about students, and Richard Peebles said, wouldn't it be wonderful if all the students came to Christchurch? Well, don't kid yourselves, they're not going to, because although people have a perception of students doing a short stint of study in between drinking and partying, they're actually not. They do not and cannot afford to leave university with crippling student debt. So that's why Wellington, Auckland, Dunedin and Palmerston North, etc. are doing extremely well because of part-time jobs. Prior to the earthquake, V-Base, which is the company that's owned by the council who runs our stadia, etc., and who brought you the Foo Fighters, Bruce Springsteen, and who will be bringing you Phil Collins on the 4th of February, Monday. That's Waitangi Day. Get your tickets and support Christchurch.
2 days before.
Thank you. No, just a wee plug there. Was the single largest temporary employer of students in the city. And that's why the Students' Association, the Canterbury University Students' Association, came to this council with a delegation to say, please build this stadium. So there are a lot of issues, and I realise in our city, but this is important. Years and years ago, we had you'd go down to the fish and chip shop, and there would be Space Invaders. Now you have e-games. E-games do not function in an open environment. They have to be in a roofed arena. You have hundreds of millions of people online watching these with millions of dollars worth of prize money. They are big, and the future is amazing what can happen with those. We also have the opportunity to have it in the central city, 400 metres away from our main public transport terminus. That's outstanding and unique in New Zealand. So there are just so many opportunities. I do have a word of caution though. When we start this journey, it's absolutely crucial for our central city and our businesses that we don't end up like a Riccarton Mall with a paddock. We do not want, I don't see how it can work if we have hospo and motels connected to the stadia, so people do not go out and stimulate retail, etc. in the central city and other places and journey out for day trips, etc. It's absolutely essential. And one person that I think really kind of captured it was a young Lachlan Johns who came here. Hopefully you will all remember him. He talked about what can be in this multi-use arena with regards to the software now. There's a lot of work globally on defining your market. So if, for instance, if your friends like it, you will like it. So rather than sending emails out, which everyone does, people just switch off. But when you're going to these games now or concerts or whatever, to be able to have your app to listen to a referee's voice or an MC's voice or something like that, to have that extra entertainment is absolutely crucial. So I'm going to vote yes for this. I think it's well overdue and needed, and the quicker the better. Thank you.
Pauline, then Andrew.
All right. Well said, Tim. Look, the arena is probably the most controversial one of these three. The other two are fairly well supported through the long-term plan consultation we had this year with grievances about our roads and the driver for the green residential red zone. So the arena is probably the most controversial one, but listening to the deputations this morning was very moving. We have probably a duty to support and almost honour these people that have gone out on a limb and invested in our city. It's called an acceleration fund, but actually, really, to me, it's a get it done fund. We've been waiting so long. We've got the Metro Sports for spades in the ground for that. The convention centre's going up as we speak. The Margaret Mayhew Playground was incredibly controversial, especially the money that went into that. But boy, did that prove us all wrong, us critics. It's worked. It's really, really revitalised that part of town, in fact, the whole of the city. So the only one lagging here is the multi-use arena. And listening to the deputations this morning, I can see, and listening to Tim, the huge economic benefit this will be to the city and the huge revitalisation and energising of the central city, which will emanate right out across the whole of Christchurch, Canterbury and the South Island. So, you know, we have to support the private sector here. They've gone out on a limb, they've invested, and we also hear that word certainty over and over again. This will give us certainty, it will give them certainty, and encourage that investment to continue. So we've had a steer from the government on this. This is an incredible gesture from the government to offer this acceleration funding. We've had a steer that this is the preferred 3 items to support today. If we go in and try and muck around and offer different things, and we're only going to delay it, and it certainly won't be an acceleration fund then. So I say let's get this done, let's do this. So I'll be supporting this today.
Andrew, David, Phil, Glenn.
Thank you. There have been a wide range of issues expressed around this matter, many of which actually at a high level relate to councils and residents' priorities. And the stadium obviously has been a subject of the discussion, roading has, the residential red zone has, and social housing and other social outcomes have as well. And I'd be extremely concerned if council had no strategy to get to good outcomes for all of these hugely important priorities. So on housing, I agree that this is a key priority. That's the reason why this council has been consulting on a proposed $30 million loan to the Otatahi Community Housing Trust, which will allow for 180 new warm, dry homes to be built. In a different environment, council would be building those homes itself, but we're in the current government policy environment that we're in, which means that for the trust to build these houses is the most effective, probably most cost-effective way to achieve this important outcome as quickly as possible. This will be a significant step towards bringing the numbers of social housing back to, and in fact eventually beyond, pre-earthquake levels. It'll replace 50 old and cold existing units. And along with the $50 million capitalisation of the trust, also a big number, this will be a catalyst for the building of more social housing. What we're talking about here is fit-for-purpose, warm, dry homes for those people that need them most. So council hasn't dropped the ball on social housing. We've actually got a plan to make life better for our existing tenants and for the new tenants who will populate those new houses, and we know there's a need out there. On roading, this was a key priority for this council in the long-term plan, and it remains a priority. That's why we're proposing portioning 40 million of this funding to roading, which of course will then attract the NZTA subsidy, as been mentioned this morning, to further increase the amount that we're able to spend on roading. None of these are small numbers, and in fact the proposal is to focus the additional activity on the worst areas, areas such as the East and Richmond. But funding's only one of the constraints around roading. The other constraint is capacity, and that takes 2 forms as well. The capacity of the construction market to be able to deliver, and the capacity of residents to be able to bear huge numbers of concurrent roading projects all at the same time, and we've seen that particularly in the central city. Now the stadium, this facility, is referred to by some as a rugby stadium. It needs to be much more than that. If this was just about rugby, I'd find it really difficult to support. But any stadium for Christchurch needs to be absolutely multi-use. It needs to be designed to be used as many hours in the day as possible. It needs to be designed to be used 365 days a year. It needs to make sure that Christchurch is truly on the map as the capital of the South Island, as the next obvious choice for concerts, for events, other stuff that we haven't even imagined yet, and some of that, just some of it, will be rugby. It's clear that the cost-sharing agreement doesn't guarantee a 50-50 government contribution, and that was borne out through the answers to my question this morning. But within that context, 220 million from government is a huge amount in anyone's language, and we're fortunate to have a government and a minister in the form of Minister Woods, who's seen the need for this total $300 million contribution to Christchurch. Again, these are big numbers, as is the $253 million ratepayer contribution, and I wish it was less. But the reality is that what we've got in front of us today is a $300 million government contribution to Christchurch on the table. This is the opportunity to provide certainty around a stadium. If indeed we believe that Christchurch should have a stadium, today is the opportunity to show certainty in that space. As a city, as the capital of the South Island, we need to have fit-for-purpose infrastructure and fit-for-purpose services, including key facilities, including roading, green space, taking the opportunity that the residential red zone presents, adequate supply of good quality social housing, and a vibrant economy, not just in the central city, but throughout the region. One that sees this great city regenerated, offering opportunity for everybody. This conversation about a stadium has been going on for a long time. It's actually been going on for way too long. And we need to make sure that we don't complicate this so that we get the benefit of the funds that we're able to benefit from, and that certainty be provided quickly. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we find the balance and that we're able to address all of our areas of priority, as I've discussed them this morning. So we now need to do what the people of Christchurch elected us to do. We need to consider the issues, we need to find the balance, we need to show leadership. We need to make the hard decisions, and we need to provide certainty, not only for the stadium, but for the other issues that have quite rightly been raised. I support progress, I support opportunity for everybody, I support a good opportunity for this city, and that's the reason I'll be supporting this proposal today.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'm going to support this resolution today, and I think my prime reasons for supporting it have been well presented today by some of our business leaders. It's the investment and the flow-on effects that this sort of projects will have, which will then provide more money for council to do things ultimately. It's not in my mind, it's not a contestable fund, and I think if it was, I'd be putting a plug in for a few things in the east at the moment. And Andrew and others have clearly indicated the concerns that some people have around should we be investing in some of our housing issues, and this council clearly has taken a step to address those sort of issues through other funding and support for a number of other initiatives. So I will support it. I think it's great for Christchurch, and let's do this.
Phil.
Thank you, and I thank staff for all the work that has been done on this, and I think it's a very clear report with all of the issues. And I guess this whole debate around whether or not to have a stadium really started back at the time of Share an Idea, when there was a huge consultation and people said they certainly wanted a sports and social arena to be included as part of our future city. So, and as we know, it started off also as being part of the cost share agreement, and I actually believe that at this point, if 7 years down the track, if we don't actually make a clear decision today, Christchurch never will. So I think it's really important that we get to grips with this. There's no question that the stadium at Addington, it was a temporary stadium. It is already costing a large amount of money to maintain and to sustain, and that we, as a city, we're not able to continue having it as a sports or concert arena. So, and today the Chamber of Commerce, they confirmed that in fact our city really is at a tipping point in terms of the need for businesses to be supported and development. And that, to me, that whole area of the need for people to be involved in their city and to be employed in the construction of these major projects is really, really important. And clearly though, as has been said, this is a government grant, and it came clearly from the Labour Party's election manifesto, when they were quite clear about the purposes for this acceleration fund. Then it was around Christchurch needing certainty, and that some speakers have already referred to that, and I think that's really essential for us to keep in mind today. I think that the whole area that has been discussed around affordable housing and social housing, that is really important, and I'm sure Councillor Livingston will have something to say about that. And it's quite clear, though, that this fund is really, that social housing and affordable housing doesn't fit this fund in terms of the government's intentions. But I think it's really important that as a council we continue to consider looking at additional funding for social housing, and in addition to what has already been decided on in our long-term plan, and as Councillor Turner said, which we are going out for consultation on right now. $30 million is no small amount. So I think it's quite clear that the stadium, in terms of its potential for business attraction and for development of our central city, is essential, and in my view that can fit alongside the future and current social housing projects.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor. Someone asked me at morning tea in the bathroom, how's it going to go today? And my response was, we'll be damned if we do and damned if we don't, which we will be. So I've looked at the social housing waitlist figures. The latest data at the end of June, 579 waiting for a social housing unit. That waitlist is shared across all the community housing providers in Christchurch, a big chunk of which is Housing New Zealand, a big chunk of which is council through the Ototahi Community Housing Trust, and there are other providers. I have, and thank you for the lobbying, it's all a good part of the democratic process, the signs, your being here, the emails, etc. I've looked at this in terms of, if say we loaded 300 million, front-loaded that today into the council accounts, we build where the demand is, 1 to 2 bedroom units at say 150 each, very cheap, build at scale, economies of scale is 2,000 units, that would be good. 400 would cover what we've lost. We know about the approaching demand. But for me, a question is, could you actually build 2,000 social housing units in 1 year at the rate of 5.4 a day? We could deliver the consents. My colleague Andrew Turner talked about capacity before. On capacity and deliverability, we all know as councillors that throwing more money at something actually doesn't speed it up. You can allocate more in a budget, but it won't deliver it faster, and that's to do with capacity and deliverability. Say we persisted with the idea the dollars required to meet the 400 gap at 150,000 each. That comes to 60 million. We've just approved a loan of half that amount, being 30, and we're going through the process of the sign-off. That's 200 a year. And then next year, my intention is we will undertake another loan, and we'll keep going until we've not only built back, but we're continuing to build for the future. My view is that housing is a system, and loading up social housing in it won't make sense. It would distort that system where it acts as an answer for those homeless. We have 200 in the 4 ABs and many more in the wider community, but I do not have a sense that we have 400, let alone 2,000. We could usher a rallying call to all builders to build social housing. Would they do it? No. The business proposition wouldn't be there. They'll do some, but they make their money in high-end, mid-market and affordable. We remain committed to social housing along with our TA partners, and we're going to put the pressure on them to contribute as well. 500 million skirt money in the east of Christchurch hasn't finished the job. The roads aren't as good as in the west.
10 seconds.
300 million crown money on social housing now wouldn't speed up the task either. So today our task is to leverage out what we have as best we can, and that's what we're going to do.
Thank you. Jamie?
I'm very supportive of all the recommendations that we have in front of us. I'll be supporting them, and I hope you will too. We're well aware of the importance for investment in our horizontal infrastructure. We're well aware of the opportunity that the residential red zone presents for us in Christchurch. And we've had 253 million on budget for a multi-purpose arena since 2003. We have sat through many rounds of consultations on this topic.
13.
We know how important it is. 2013 rather, yeah. You can quantify things in dollar terms, they're right in front of us there, but what you can't often quantify is the value that certainty brings. The certainty that we will give Christchurch from this decision today, particularly around the stadium, cannot be underestimated. It's enormous, and it will help define Christchurch for the better. A closed-roof multi-purpose arena is not a nice-to-have. It's essential if we're to be taken seriously as a city, and it will be an iconic community facility and a cornerstone for entertainment and economic benefit to our region for the next 50-plus years. The fact of the matter is, and although we like to think it at times, it's not really us with council or the Crown that are going to rebuild this city. It's the private sector investment. We play our part, but our role in this is to act as a catalyst and to provide leadership and certainty. It's the private sector that do the rest. And without them, we don't have a rebuild. And this is what this is all about today. The private sector has held up their end of the bargain. Now it's our turn. My only regret is that we haven't been able to do this sooner. We have an opportunity today to give certainty, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that providing certainty around this today will be a decision that history judges favourably. So today we will drag the chain no longer, because as we've heard earlier today, the multi-purpose arena is something that we cannot afford not to do.
Mike?
Thank you. I guess I'm going to echo a lot of what has already been said by my fellow councillors, which I guess is a clear signal that this council is united and committed to ensuring that we have a vibrant city centre for everyone. Development in our central city has already occurred on the back of the many anchor projects for Christchurch, and not giving certainty today would be a disservice to those that have invested in our city. The multi-use arena, along with the other major projects, will create employment and growth that will actually help keep rates at a sustainable level. I just want to quickly touch on the transport, because actually I think this is a very significant investment. We know our roads are damaged, and we know the impact this has on the many people, their well-being, and this was heard loud and clear during the long-term plan process. The $40 million request actually has the ability, with the new NZTA financial assistance rates coming soon, to actually increase that up to nearly $100 million. So there's a massive, significant investment in transport infrastructure in our city.
Dion and then Aaron.
I just wanted to say thank you to the government as well for the $300 million that we're discussing today. It's nice to have. I would have liked to have RAF's $1 billion fund, but you know, we've got to take what we can at the moment, and we will still be working on the cost share wrap up, I hope. But anyway, it sounds like this is going well, which is great. I think this gives certainty, as everybody keeps saying. In the context of the paper that we're going to be discussing after this, actually, this is very important, and it would have been nice to discuss that first, and then we can say, well, we're walking our talk, because the Central City Momentum papers that we're going to be discussing soon, it does paint a little bit of a grim picture about where our central city is at the moment. But we have a chance to actually start turning that around, and the paper that's coming up next is going to spell out how we can turn this around, and by walking the talk today and actually voting for the Capital Acceleration Fund, especially for the stadium, multi-purpose arena, will actually provide that certainty for that investment community that's out there looking for opportunities in our city, the city of opportunity where anything is possible. The city, to get the economic prosperity in our central city, that paper says we need 15,000 more people working in the central city. That's actually, we'll just bring it up to what it was before the earthquake. And we've heard from the Chamber of Commerce that the multi-purpose arena will provide jobs. It won't just provide jobs when the multi-purpose arena is actually built, but as the construction industry winds up or starts to slow down at the tail end of the rebuild, the actual construction of this thing is actually going to provide a lot of jobs for people that will create certainty for businesses in the central city as we start transitioning to our new economy, which I hope we will start to look at in the future paper that's coming up next, because there is a lot of work that as a city we need to do that. But as Mike was saying there, the one thing that I'm very, very excited about actually is, and the thing that actually this City Council we need to get on top of, is the condition of our roading infrastructure. We've let that deteriorate over the years because we're only replacing 2% of that infrastructure every year. That's not good enough. Now getting up to $100 million with this will, as was said, because of the match funding, will actually make a massive difference, and actually that will lift the spirits of our people in our city a lot more than many other of the spend that will be going on. But so this is really good. Residential red zone, I'm very happy with the money going to that as well, because we do need to start thinking about that opportunity for our city. And just one last thing, I do hope with the stadium conversation or multi-purpose arena conversation that we actually will start still looking for other opportunities for funding. We could sell the naming rights to the stadium. You know, those kind of opportunities are going to come, which can come off the total cost of this thing, and then give money back to the ratepayers there, so we can actually do this for other initiatives in the city, such as the you know, what's been said there. But I also wanted to say thank you to the people that have come in here today, the business community and the people up there. We do hear what you're saying, but there are other mechanisms that we are doing to deliver the social housing.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, a lot of things have been covered off, so I'll try not to touch on any of those, and I'll talk about aspirations and disappointments in this, and how small amount of money, $300 million, suddenly sounds in post-quake Christchurch, which is kind of just so weird. I'm not really in favour of C, but I'll go along with it because all my colleagues are. I don't believe we should be taking on the residential red zone, and I think it'll be a noose around our neck that we can't afford, but it's stunning. It'll make a great national park, and I wish we weren't spending any other money on it. But that aside, it looks great from the air at the moment, and it's just going to get better. And that figure there is 5% of the cost of that green spine. It's a phenomenal amount of money. And then the other one, the transport network, and we build back our roads pretty averagely, to be honest. If anyone here's ever been overseas, you'll know how terrible ours are. And, sorry? It's only 150 million. Right, yes, okay. And thanks, Neil. And the transport network, obviously, you know, $1 million of that could go over to the west to fix a set of traffic lights. And then the multi-purpose arena, I'll just touch on this because the blueprint came out and it did grab onto a lot of aspirations our city had and a lot of dreams. It's taken way too long. Man, this rebuild's slow. In 1906, when San Francisco had a population just over 20% bigger than ours, they had a quake and they rebuilt in 9 years. And they had way more to rebuild. They lost 28,000 buildings, had 3,000 people killed. And their city hall they rebuilt, which is 45,000 square metres, it just pales anything we're doing in comparison. And they didn't have hydraulics, and they didn't have cranes, and they didn't have power tools. Something's gone wrong in the last 100 years as we've got all this technology. Everything costs way more to deliver and takes way longer. So there's this thing called process, which seems to cost us a lot of time and cost us a lot of money because the guys on the hammers at the tail end are still generally in the lower paid part of our society and are still the ones putting up the buildings, or the guys on shovels and diggers fixing the roads. It's a strange outcome of the last 100 years, but it's where we're at. And this stadium will be opened 14 years after the quake, and the quake started, and that's a little unacceptable for me. The costs are high. Hopefully we'll find some savings in there. I'll just touch on one other point, and that was raised this morning around the social housing, and as someone that lived in social housing for 5 years of their formative years of their life, and then comparing that to the stadium. A stadium's an aspirational part of your city where you go to concerts and you go to events and you go to sports events.
10 seconds. And
hopefully, if you're lucky enough, you'll be one of the ones performing in there. But as a child, you don't aspire to live in social housing. You aspire to visit a stadium. And it's a strange situation having the two in the same debate because they're quite different subjects. I look forward to the delivery of our social housing going forward for those that can't sort out their own housing or need a little help for a portion of their life. And I'll finally finish on bringing both political sides together. Let's do this and make Christchurch great again.
Yanni.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's really obvious from the deputations we've heard this morning that this is a matter of high significance. People actually want to have their say on this. And if you go back through history, it's very easy to look at one of the huge dilemmas with the blueprint. And that is, there was no public consultation on the blueprint at all. It was a decision made by government. It was over on top of what the people in Christchurch had done through Share an Idea. If you go to the cost share agreement, which set out probably the biggest funding agreement that this city has ever done with central government, you find that that was done in secret with no public consultation at all. So it's very disappointing to see that where we've got an opportunity to work with central government over a future in terms of funding, that once again there is no public consultation around how that money should be spent. I have a lot of sympathy for the people that have come in to here today to say that their expectation was, when this funding was announced, that it was up to the people of Christchurch to decide. If you look back at Share an Idea, you see very clearly that the stadium did not get a lot of mentions. In fact, people and green spaces were at the heart of Share an Idea. We do know that social housing is not being fixed as fast as people would like. Part of the issue is that we had a housing accord with central government, with the previous central government, who took out $70 million and changed the conditions of the income-related rent subsidy to mean that we were in a worse off position for housing, both social and affordable, in our city. I think it is more than appropriate to ask them to honour the housing accord and put some money towards helping us deal with the impact of social housing. If you go back again to the Central City Plan that we did as council, the Share an Idea with huge citizen participation, social housing in the inner city was seen as a key objective to rebuild and increase social housing in our inner city. That has not happened to date. I just want to go through and say one of the really important things is that we miss synergy in our city. I agree with Dion in regards to the idea that we should have the Regenerate Christchurch review of the blueprint before we're making decisions about how to spend money. What we can see quite clearly is that people were overpromised and under-delivered. And I think that is because the city, the size of Christchurch, it is simply unsustainable and unaffordable to take public buildings, as the central government did, and reallocate them on top of private land. That increased the cost of the central city recovery from about 800 million to 2 billion. And that is why things have been slow, because we simply cannot afford to have brand new projects done in isolation.
Thank you.
So finally, I'd just say I would like to move an amendment that we publicly consult on the Capital Acceleration Fund. This is endorsed by the recent surveys, both through Quality of Life and the resident survey, that show that people's... What do you mean? It's not too late.
It's an amendment at the beginning. I'm sorry, it was moved and seconded and we entered debate. You can't move an amendment partway through the process after you've already spoken.
Yes, you can.
Nobody's got an opportunity to speak to the amendment. I mean, you can't do it.
Yes,
it's just not within standing orders.
Well,
Ian, would you stand up and please advise us the standing orders?
The opportunity for moving any amendments to the motions that were put is gone. You are now in debate, and the next step is to vote on the current motion.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Vicky Buck.
Thank you, and it's great to hear the debate around this actually, and to hear the submissions this morning. I think we have the overwhelming submission that I've had from people on this is, could you just do it and just make it happen, because we are so sick of waiting and we want speed and certainty, and that's not just from the business community. We have a current stadium, which is just a stadium, that is fast nearing the end of its viable life. And whatever we do, we're going to have to do something different in relation to a multi-use arena. I hate seeing people leave Christchurch for Auckland or Dunedin for the weekend. It irritates me intensely. But I envisage a type of multi-use arena very similar to the one that that Richard Peebles outlined, but even more so. That sports, fine, but I see this more as e-games, as concerts, as all sorts of things that bring us together as people. And I see it as school events, young people events, university games, all sorts of things that mean that the multi-use arena is used all the time. We are all going to pay for this for a long time. So we all need to have a very democratic approach to how it's used, and it doesn't need to have high entry costs. In terms of the transport, I love the fact that it attracts yet another subsidy from government. I think that's great. We heard a huge amount of input at the long-term plan, which was only some weeks ago, in terms of people wanting more in that field. So, and I think the way in which it's been allocated around, or suggested to be allocated around the city, is great. In terms of the red zone, I actually think that's a stunning asset for this city. I think it's one of the huge opportunities that's come out of a huge disaster. And I think what will happen in that red zone or green zone or whatever it becomes, that incredible ecological, environmental area, will just be amazing. So I think it's fantastic that we're actually allocating some money to do some things in there, and there is still 17.5 million extra as well sitting in the DIA fund that has yet to be allocated. So I think in terms of this now, actually I think we do just need to get on with it. I think people are really, really sick of waiting for things in Christchurch. They want some speed, they want some certainty, and they want us just to get on and do this. We heard from the University of Canterbury Students Association actually how much they wanted excitement and things to go to when they came here. And we heard how many students were now moving to Christchurch because they couldn't afford the rents in Wellington and Auckland. And that was actually a huge increase. They've just had a dramatic increase in their July intake. We want to continue that dramatic increase for education opportunities across the city, but they need things that attract people to all sorts of events. And they asked us at the time of the long-term plan, please could you get a multi-use arena so that we don't have to go elsewhere to go to concerts. So I think this is great that the council is so united about making this happen, and that we're going to make this happen today.
But Jimmy.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah. When the council put the long-term plan for the consultation, in that time also one key, the strategic document is the council proposed strategic framework. Just want to remind the mayor and the councillors, particularly we focus on vision, our community outcome, and the strategic priorities. Like a vision, the Christchurch is a city of opportunity for all, open to new ideas, new people, new ways of doing things. A city where anything is possible. But how to make it happen, to make it successful? So I review the community outcome. It looks like, regarding to all the $300 million, whether it's compliant with this community outcome, strong community, livable city, healthy environment, and prosperous economy. It looks like at least three of them, livable city, healthy environment, and prosperous economy, we all comply with. Only the strong community, then we need to consider, maybe have any alternative way can give the people, give the residents more confidence. The actually council on their behalf will be boldness to make this put in the recommendation. And also this is only the proposal we are all aware. Actually, finally still on the hand. But generally speaking, as the councillor, especially for the citywide council, I think those allotment, that's reasonable. Because we heard so many submissions this morning. Actually, Central City, not only for this local city only. There's a nationwide city, there's international city. We always mention, we like to attract people to come here, to visit here, to live here, to work here, to investment here. But how do we to create more opportunity to attract them? So we need to think about it. So, but this one is basically we all aware those $100 million was allowance is for these three categories: new multi-use arena, and also horizontal the kind of infrastructure, as well as rezone the area. This allocate already, but detail one, like the staff he mentioned earlier, still under the one when they approve. Therefore, each category we still need to establish more. In that time, still go to the public consultation, feedback from the people, etc. So this is a principle. So I support this recommendation.
Perfect. That is almost exactly 3 minutes. I'm impressed. Anne.
Thank you. I'm totally supportive of this decision today. This decision provides certainty and accelerates progress for our city's development. These projects closely align with the stated objectives of the Capital Acceleration Fund, and they are consistent with the Council's decision as part of the LTP process. But more importantly, this decision provides hope for our city. Our businesses need this, our residents need this, both our current and our future residents. Our region need this, particularly our multi-use arena. And we need to know that going forward we have hope for our economy, hope for the well-being of our city, hope for its vibrancy. I am satisfied that our city, as well as putting money into these projects, is also caring for those who need housing. We have $80 million committed to that at the moment, as well as many other initiatives that address the inequity in our city. So I'm totally supportive of this. I'm excited about it. We're all tired of making that trek down to Dunedin, so let's get on with it.
Thank you. Well, I'll just say a quick word and then I'll hand over to Raf to close the debate. You know, I'm on the record historically as having a very strong view with how the blueprint was processed and developed, and I have a very strong view that community has to be fully engaged in that process, and they weren't. But what the government of the day did was that they wrote it into our district plan, and they put allocations against particular sites for particular projects. And there is a site that has been set aside in the central city for a multi-use arena. It's been established in the district plan that that is what it is for. And at the point that we're at now, we have business people and their employees, and I think we forget that they employ a large number of people who also pay rates in our city. And they are they've made their commitment, they've made their investments, knowing that there would be a multi-use arena built on that site. There have been a lot of international debates about convention centres and stadia and whether they do activate and whether they do act as a catalyst for a city's creation. But never anywhere can I find an example of something that is right in the heart of the CBD. Nothing of that scale, right in close to the CBD. And so all of these businesses have invested their own resources, and we heard today that they could have picked up the insurance settlement and walked away, but they chose to invest in the city, and they did so on the basis that their own land had been taken from them by central government on the basis that these particular assets would be developed. And what the government's announcement of the $300 million Capital Regeneration Acceleration Fund, what that did was give us as a city the opportunity to provide the missing link, and that was for the stadium to actually, the multi-use arena to actually be completed. So I agree with the statement that was made today. This is something that whose time has come. We have to make a decision in order to progress things, and I'm supporting the resolution today. Raf.
Thank you. We can't change the past, but we can create the future, and I think this is the opportunity in front of us today. I think all the sort of reasons to support this have been well covered, but really what this does is it ends one of the most intractable problems we've had with the cost share and the Central City Blueprint, which is this huge funding gap for this asset. I had many conversations with the previous Prime Minister and the previous Prime Minister, telling them to just fund this gap. That's what they should have done in the first place. They didn't, and that's why we're here today. And I said, in the end, government will always end up funding this gap because the private sector simply isn't going to take on such a risky proposition. And that's the reality of a post-disaster rebuild. The public sector picks up the slack together with the private sector. What's been slightly different in this post-disaster reconstruction is how the private sector has actually invested ahead of the public sector, and the public sector does have a duty to finish the job. Last year, I think as Dion mentioned in the election, I put this on the table, $200 million for the stadium. And we're lucky that both parties responded to that. National put forward a bid for $120 million to the stadium. Labour came with $300 million for general regeneration, and we're quite fortunate that they are in government because it's a bigger number. And they should be congratulated for that because we've got to finish the job. And I think there was a realisation that this money was only going to come from central government. Ultimately, it was their plan in the beginning. This will be an incredible asset for the city, like the new Central Library, which looks stunning, the Metro Sports Centre, the Convention Centre, and the incredible Town Hall. Christchurch is going to be the place to live in the city, and this is the final piece of the very, very complicated jigsaw that we now need to put into place. And as Richard said, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is our decision. At some point, we've got to make the decision, and we've got to make it today. The Minister for Christchurch Regeneration is very supportive of this. In the House last week, on the anniversary, the 4th of September anniversary, she was very clear about progressing the final business case on the stadium, doing the global settlement, and finishing the job. I want to finish the job, certainly before I leave there. We need to finish the job, so let's finish the job.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. Did you get Yanni against? Yep. Yanni opposed? Yep, yep. All right, so we're going to adjourn now for the lunch break. For those that want to go downstairs, there's a presentation happening for the young people gathering with the
strategic priorities.
Strategic priorities. On the strategic priorities, you're welcome to go. But I'm going to adjourn the meeting until, so I'd say 1:30. Yeah, 1:30, and that just gives everyone an opportunity to get things done. All right, 1:30. Thank you.